I'd like to invite up Dr. Leigh Hochberg. Dr. Hochberg is the director of the Center for Neurotechnology and Neurorecovery, Neurocritical Care, Acute Stroke, and Emergency Neurology in the Department of Neurology at Massachusetts General Hospital. He's a professor of engineering at Brown University. He's director of the VA RR&D Center for Neurorestoration and Neurotechnology in the Rehabilitation R&D Service at the Providence VA Medical Center, and a senior lecturer on neurology at Harvard Medical School.
Great. Well, Aaron, thanks very much, and thanks to the AAAS and Dana for the invitation back. It's great to be part of the tag team with Jonathan once again, and thanks everybody for being here today, and which I guess is just another typical day on the Hill. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some progress that we've made in developing neurotechnologies. Most probably everything that I say will be focused on restoring function to people who have lost that function, particularly to our wounded warriors and to others who, as a result of either neurologic injury or neurologic disease, have lost some prior abilities. Quick financial disclosure up there, not really relevant to anything that I'm going to describe today, and very important in larger font beneath it, disclosure to the many institutes, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and other philanthropies who have supported this research. Most important disclosure, which is really true for any of the technologies, whether it's ones that I'll be describing momentarily or any of the others in this neurotech space, it's a great group of people who I get to work with every day, and the fact that they represent a large number of disciplines in engineering, clinical sciences, computer science, neurosurgery, program managers, of course, very important. And as you already know implicitly, you should ignore the people whose faces you see, because it's actually the people whose names are on the right who are the students and our colleagues who have actually done all the work. So one type of neurotechnology, one that I'll focus on, are called brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. And this is really the take-home summary of what a brain-computer interface is, or BCI. It starts with a question, one that Jonathan was just alluding to. Can we listen to the brain, or can we listen to a part of the brain and know what somebody is trying to do? For example, if somebody is unable to move their arm as the result of a disease or injury, can we know that they're trying to move their right hand to the right? And if we want to do that, we have to answer some questions. First, we have to decide what kind of signal we want to record from the brain. There's lots of different signals that we could record. Some are electrical, some are chemical, some can be recorded magnetically. There's signals related to blood flow. And all of these different signals will require different sensors. And in addition, want to decide whether you want to record from one place in the brain or a lot of places in the brain or the whole brain. So that gets us in the upper left and the neural sensor and how we're going to extract, for example, something about movement, the intention to move. The second part of any of these brain-computer interfaces and many neurotechnologies is, once you have the signal in hand, is doing something with it, that is decoding it or understanding what that signal is. So in the black box kind of lives the home of my good friends in computational neuroscience, who have one of the most fun jobs in the world, which is to try to figure out what a brain signal means and to be able to decode it in real time. And if there are any computational neuroscientists here today, I apologize for reducing your entire career to the capital letter A. Before you leave the desk, though, and you're designing a brain-computer interface, you want to think a little bit about what you want to do with it. For somebody who's lost the ability to move or lost the ability to speak, if we could restore the ability to type on the computer screen or to browse the internet for education or entertainment, those would all presumably be helpful additions, restorations to one's quality of life. Lots of other technologies that could also potentially be controlled. One of the reasons the Department of Veterans Affairs has supported this research for quite some time is, as you all know, we've had wounded warriors returning recently with limbs that are no longer there as a result of improvised explosive devices. Some incredible prosthetic limbs themselves have been developed over the past few years, but the controllers for them are still kind of simple. So a great prosthetic limb, but you may have to wiggle your left foot in order to move your right hand. And wouldn't it be better if you could just think about moving your right hand again? Some other things that are up there, hopefully we can use these types of technologies to rehabilitate after neurologic injury. And Jonathan was referring to some of the neuropsychiatric conditions. It might even be possible, if we can listen to the brain and understand those brain signals in real time, that we might be able to return a signal to the brain that is closed-loop neuromodulation and be able to restore some unhealthy brain activity back towards what that person would believe is and want as a more healthy brain activity. So all possibilities in this kind of field of brain-computer interfaces. Jumping ahead, and thanks to a century, not quite a century, half a century plus of fundamental neuroscience that's been publicly funded, we got to the point where we could place a small array of electrodes, and that little array, Jonathan showed that Utah array before, the one that's up there you see on the head of a penny, or I guess the flip side of a penny. The 4 by 4 millimeters has 100 electrodes that are on there, can be tapped into the top of the brain, and each of those electrodes can record from one or maybe 2 or 3 individual neurons. Today's technology, is shown by the illustration up there, is an array that's connected to some wires, that's connected to something that's sticking up from the top of the head, a titanium pedestal. We'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But if everything works the way that we want it to, there could be somebody with tetraplegia, that is somebody with cervical spinal cord injury, who's moving a cursor on a computer screen simply by thinking about the movement of their own hand. This type of research, in addition to being multidisciplinary, often needs to happen, at least happen at its best, with teams from different institutions, and proud to be part of one of those teams up here representing several institutions, hospitals, and the VA. So just a little bit of history. Aaron instructed me to make sure that I didn't start from where I left off 6 years ago, so I'll step back just a little bit. The gentleman who you see there on the right side, you see his head. You see a cable protruding from the top of his head, which we've connected to a little pedestal. We'll get rid of that cable in just a little while. But stepping back to kind of 2004-05, he's going to think about moving his own hand. He was about 24 when this video was taken. When he was 21, he was breaking up a fight at a July 4th beach party and was stabbed in the back of the neck. Had what's known as a C4 a spinal cord injury, and of course couldn't move his arms or his legs since then. He is, though, going to move that cursor on the screen.
Okay, so here's the cybernetics desktop.
And you'll hear somebody talking in the background. As that cursor is moving, he's thinking about moving his own left hand. So we're recording from the right side of the brain, which of course controls the left side of the body. And he's imagining or attempting or intending, which may be 3 different words that mean different things, to move that cursor.
Very good.
So you can see that he's sweeping that cursor over an icon. This is a simulated email that opens up a new email. Even back then, so even 12 plus years ago, we also wanted to see whether somebody might be able to control a physical device. So here's a physical device. This is a real prosthetic hand. It's made by Liberating Technologies for somebody who may have had a traumatic transradial amputation. And you see our participant there. See if my cursor is visible. Yep, so there's his abdomen. You'll see him in just a moment. He's looking at that hand, and he's going to say open or close so we know what he's trying to do. And you may be able to hear his reaction to this.
Close. Holy shit. Open. Close. Nice. Open. Close. Not bad, man. Not bad at all. Close.
So I always like looking at that, but it is really simple. It is a state decision, basically. Should that hand be open or closed? And we need to get a lot better than that if these are going to be useful clinical technologies. So now let's skip up to months. I can't exactly remember which month we were here 6 years ago, but right around that time in 2011, this extraordinary woman who, when she was 42, had a brainstem stroke. That brainstem stroke left her with no functional use of her hands and the inability to speak. And here she is 14 years after that, still with no functional use of her hands, still unable to speak. She is able to move her eyes and her head. And what she's thinking about doing is she's thinking about reaching out to grab those little kind of targets, those raspberry ice cream cones. And as she tries to reach out and grab, that robot arm is doing what she's trying to do. And it's slow, and it's not perfectly accurate. But you can see that she's able to get there. And the other video, the smaller video, is another gentleman, 65 years old, similar stroke, unable to speak, no functional movement. and he's controlling what was then the second generation of the DECA arm. That DECA arm, which is now in its third generation, is now commercialized, and thanks to VA research, has found its way towards that, to be in that commercialization, to become available for veterans and others with limb loss. So when we asked her, and this will be the last bit of the history, what she wanted to do with this kind of brain gate technology she said that she wanted to take a drink. And we said, okay. So at her request, we placed the cinnamon latte into the thermos, and we asked her to reach out to grab this thermos. So she still is unable to move about her trunk, so she can't move left, right, or back or forth. So she really needs to line up this thermos right in front of her. It'll take her a moment to do that, but once she's able to kind of line that thermos up, she's going to bring it over towards her mouth. And then when she gets there, she's going to turn her wrist or kind of pronate her hand or the robot's hand to be able to get that straw into her mouth. Next 30 seconds or so really don't have anything to do with neurotechnology or brain-computer interfaces, but everything to do with her still profound disability. She has kind of a restricted ability to, restricted sip power, so it's going to take her a little while to get that cinnamon latte into her mouth. While she's doing that, I'll point out that the guy sitting behind her is one of our engineers. He's under strict instruction to show no emotion. And she'll move the straw around just a little bit more. And she's able to do that, and I can kind of see her reaction. Now, I can assure you that's not the first time in nearly 15 years that she's had something to drink. But it is the first time in nearly 15 years that she was able to do so solely of her own volition without somebody else having to take that cup and put it into the device that was attached to the headrest of her wheelchair and put the straw into her mouth. So she was happy, and we were happy, and that guy's fired. So let's catch up just a little bit. Let's see if I can make that a little softer. So for somebody with brainstem stroke who's unable to speak, for somebody with advanced ALS who's losing the ability to communicate, if we could provide a more rapid way to communicate, for example, some pointing on an interesting-looking keyboard, they might be able to communicate much more readily. In fact, these two examples of these radial keyboards are both being driven by participants in our BrainGate research who had ALS, who had limited or no use of their own hand, and they're moving the cursor into one of these pieces of the pie, which is kind of a radial keyboard. It selects one of the letters, and then you can move one of the words over from the green box. And the two folks whose faces you see, Dan Bacher and Beata Juresevich, two of the scientists on our team who helped to develop this. And you can see just how much text they were able to generate, that is the two participants in the trial, again, just by thinking about the movement of their own hand. So now I'll hop to another participant with ALS, and here he's moving the cursor, that is, he's moving the little white dot on the computer screen to acquire that red target on the screen, and when he gets there, he's clicking, which is the click that you hear. Imagine squeezing his hand and clicking on that red target. And you'll notice, importantly, that we are not, you kind of notice the background. You know, we're not in a university laboratory, we're not in the hospital, we're in the living room doing this. And that's really an important component, is that we're trying to develop and test these technologies, not in a perfectly well-controlled Faraday cage that makes sure that everything is as perfect as it can be for neurophysiology. We're doing it in his living room, where the kids may come in or anybody else may come in. We've had dogs that have come in and chewed through the optical cable. This system needs to work wherever it, wherever it needs to work, not just in a science lab. And thankfully, he was able to do that. So if he's able to point and click that readily anywhere on the screen, one could develop any other type of keyboard. This is just a square. The letters are arranged on the order of frequency that they appear in the English alphabet. That is the American English alphabet, which is why the THE is across the center. There's a woman with ALS who has a little use of her hand, and she's imagining moving her hand, and she here is pointing and clicking. And this is just from a paper to catch us up now to this year. And as she's pointing and clicking that phrase, to type out the phrase that's at the top, She and other folks in the trial were able to get up to about 39 correct characters per minute of typing. And for somebody without a physical disability, if one imagines holding a cell phone and maybe your non-dominant hand and texting as you're walking down the street, probably not that much faster than she's able to do here. So when I saw this, I began to believe that we were actually on the way towards developing a communication technology that might really be clinically useful for somebody with a severe speech and motor impairment, such as somebody with advanced ALS. And worth noting, because of the military context that we're here about today, that there is an increased incidence of ALS as a result of the military, or for those who have served in the military, and as a result, it's 100% service disability covered by the VA. But what about reconnecting somebody's own limb, allowing somebody to move their own limb again? So this is a gentleman, also a veteran, who had a cervical spinal cord injury. He was riding his bicycle in the rain, and a truck in front of him stopped and ran into the truck, and as a result had very limited use of his arms and legs since then. So what you're seeing right now is what he can do, and I'll just pause the video for a moment. You can see that he really can't move his arm. He can't open and close his hand. And just to point out with the cursor here, this is a robotic assistive device. It's basically an arm support. It's a robot that, if it's activated, can elevate or kind of lower his shoulder. And he's in our brain gate trial. This symbol that says FES off. FES is functional electrical stimulation, technology that's been around for 30 plus years, continues to be improved. And it represents about 12 pairs of muscles that have been implanted with electrodes. And currently that system is off. So he's being asked to move his arm, he's trying to move his arm, he's thinking about moving his arm, and that signal is being decoded in real time, but it's not going anywhere. What'll happen in a moment, oops, we'll go back and show you that. What'll happen in just a moment is that the same person will, let's get this playing, will have the FES system turned on. And now when he tries to move his arm, in this case, we're sending signals to that robotic assistive device, so he's lifting his arm. But when he's flexing his elbow, that's him. That's kind of brain directly down to arm. When he's opening and closing his hand, clearly you can see that that's his own hand that's moving. Slow, simple for sure, but it's the beginnings of reconnecting brain to limb and allowing somebody with a cervical spinal cord injury to regain control of his own limb. And the reason for that robot to elevate his arms, you can't currently, or at least with him, not able to implant enough muscles to allow that, that shoulder elevation. Asked what he wanted to do with this, and he chose mashed potatoes. So again, he's thinking about moving his own hand and grabbing those mashed potatoes and bringing it to his mouth. So being able to restore slowly, simply, very basic, core, important function, and an important step, I think, towards restoring these key activities of daily living. And this is some great work done by my colleagues at Case Western, Bob Kirsch and Blue Edge Boy at both Case Western and the Cleveland FES Center of the VA. So for him, being able to eat those mashed potatoes is a step towards recovery. Now, there's still two strange-looking gray boxes that are sticking out of the top of his head. Those probably need to go. So there's a lot of the rest of what I've showed you. So there's a gray box sticking out of his head. That looks like a 1980s era kind of parallel computer cable of some sort. That can't be part of a future technology. The amplifier, a big thing on the back of the wheelchair, can't be part of one. The rack of electronics that's needed to decode the neural activity in real time can't be part of a future kind of clinical medical technology. And Katie, wonderful as she is, the technician who is savvy in MATLAB and can set all this up, also cannot accompany the medical technology when it's widely distributed. Katie is now a fourth-year emergency medicine resident here in town. But there's still one of Katie's successors who's required to make these things work. So we got to get rid of all of that. The first part is getting rid of the cable. So things I carry in my pocket. So we can now replace the cable with a wireless transmission of this full bandwidth of neural activity. this is for those with an engineering background or like keep track of these things. This could be somewhere between 20 and 30 excuse me, megabytes of neural activity that are being transmitted kind of at any moment. Well, let me rephrase that. This can be recording the electrical activity about 20 kilohertz, 20 or 30 kilohertz, and about 100 megabits a second in order to beam the neural activity to get from brain to receiver. Already done in animals, and as discussed at the Society for Neuroscience recently, is beginning to be used in the pilot clinical trial as well. That's an external component that clearly is also not a future medical technology that's going to have a broad impact. If you can fully implant it, which is the other thing that I keep in my pocket, then we're on the way to the same way that cardiac pacemakers and deep brain stimulators were developed originally with leads coming out of the head or coming out of the chest. Now there's the potential to fully implant this system. And thanks to a brain initiative, UH2 grant, we're going through the final medical manufacturing of this, beginning the regulatory steps with the hope that in about a year we'll have the opportunity to begin a clinical trial with a fully implanted device that would allow the full bandwidth of neural activity recorded from 2 of these arrays to be transmitted, again, to see if people with tetraplegia control a cursor on a computer screen or some other external or potentially internal device just by thinking about the movement of their own hand. Going 1 generation or maybe 2 generations further, also, as Jonathan alluded to, we've moved from actual devices that I can pull out of my pocket to illustrations, which means that we're a little bit earlier on. But thanks to Arthur Nemico and the great team that he's put together, there's the possibility that whether it be thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of individual nodes in the brain might be able to not only be recorded from simultaneously and wirelessly with inductive power, but also stimulating and communicating between those sites, and that could be, if that technology can be developed, which we're certainly very excited about, that could be of great help to again restore lost neurologic function. So where are we in the rest of the field headed, or at least parts of the rest of the field? Neuroengineering better devices to record from the brain, always getting better at decoding this brain activity, getting better control over external and internal devices, whether it be prosthetic limbs or one's own limb. And there is still a lot of both fundamental neuroscience and really important neural engineering to be done. Everything that's up there in yellow is work that has to happen to get this to the point of being clinically available. And with that, I'll just show some of the team hard at work and pause there and look forward to joining Jonathan on the panel. Thanks very much.